What's up, guys? So I thought it would be interesting to do kind of like a comparative analysis of what gay men and gay dating is like in the three cities that I've lived in long term, which are Los Angeles, I lived there for about a year, New York City, I lived there for like almost a decade, and Miami, where I currently live, and I've spent over 6 months now total living here. And there's definitely a different identity in each of these cities when it comes to gay life and gay dating. So I thought I would explore that through this video. So in Miami, where I am now, I would say you definitely find a more traditional culture. Here you find more traditional roles of like, you know, a dominant gay man and a more submissive gay man. And you find less of that in-between gray area. Like here, people are a certain way, they want to stick to that. There's very much more of a macho element here in the masculinity and an expectation of how a man is supposed to be. I think a lot of that goes back to Miami is, you know, it's evolving quickly, but it's a slower pace in terms of cultural evolution than LA or New York City, which are such huge, you know, like juggernaut cities in America. Miami also, of course, has the Latin American influence, so that keeps a certain traditional culture intact. People are more old school here is what I'm trying to say compared to New York or LA. This creates certain issues sometimes because, of course, then that kind of comes back to this concept of toxic masculinity, and you find men who maybe are very masculine, but they have so many sort of complexes and insecurities from being who they are, which is being gay in America, in the world, or whatever. And this kind of inner conflict they seem to have with their sexuality and their masculinity, even though they don't have to be, you know, conflicting things. But I've noticed that here I find that a lot. So it's only here that I've had quite bizarre experiences where, you know, I meet a guy who I thought was open and happy with his life and whatever, and then they ghost me and I discover that they're actually on the down low or stuff like that. That's only ever happened to me here. Whereas in LA, I find that it's way more gray area, the masculinity stuff and sexuality. In LA, I found that a lot of men are openly bisexual and open to the possibilities when it comes to other guys. Like they don't feel like they have to be a specific, that they have to fulfill a certain kind of role sexually or romantically with another man. Now, to each his own, right? I think there's pros and cons to every kind of culture with this stuff. I will say that something that was always frustrating for me in LA was that I often felt like because of this phenomenon that it is more open-minded and it's more flexible, you often find grown men who kind of act like teenage boys, you know, like skater boys or like surfer guys who never really grew out of that. So it's definitely a double-edged sword. And in New York City, I would say it's somewhere between LA and Miami when it comes to that. And of course, with New York, what you find is more sort of type A personalities, a lot of yuppies, you know, young urban professionals. It's more of a career-driven city. So you have people who are more conservative with their personal lives. And then of course, within New York City, you have different hubs. I mean, Brooklyn gay culture is very different from like, you know, Upper West Side gay culture. When it comes to actual sex and hookup culture, I would say Miami is definitely where it's most sort of open and invited, I guess, with these different apps and at bars. It's a very sexual culture, which is not surprising because again, you have a lot of tourists as well as immigrants from places like Brazil that are notoriously more sexual and open and touchy-feely cultures. It's also just warm weather both day and night, so people dress more casually and in a more sexy kind of way. Whereas in a place like LA, let's say, people are always driving. It's not really a walkable city. So if people are driving to the bars, and the bars all actually close much earlier in LA, they close at like 2 in the morning. That already creates a different culture because you have a ton of people who now are out and about at night, feeling more of a need to be responsible and get home by a certain time and not drink too much to be behind the wheel. It's just a different vibe, and it's so interesting how little elements like this affect people's reaction to interactions with other gay men. Obviously, that doesn't mean that hookup culture is not a thing in LA, but these things have an effect, just like in New York City, the fact that half the year it's cold, and then I guess you could say a quarter of the year it's not cold, but it's not warm quite yet. Things like this affect how then people dress and how often they want to be outside, and that lends itself to a less openly, sexy culture like Miami. Now, in terms of actually dating, New York City is such a busy place, and everybody's like hustling to get that promotion, to get a higher salary because they gotta pay their expensive rent, that I think dating for me was definitely the hardest in New York City. I felt like people are just, it's like a revolving door, and people are so career driven and so busy with trying to hustle professionally or financially that it makes it so much harder to really truly date. Whereas LA and Miami, for me, always felt like two places, and the weather definitely has a huge impact on this, but two places where people really still care about their work-life balance. So you have more of an openness to traditional, dating and the rituals of dating and building a relationship with somebody. Those are my general observations with living in these three cities. If any of you have lived or currently live in these three cities, I'd love to hear your feedback. Also, I'd love to hear about other cities that I'm not familiar with. Like, I've never been to Seattle. I haven't been to San Francisco since I was like a teenager. So other cities in America that have a gay presence, I'd love to know what the kind of general experience is like to be there as a gay person.